This morning, we are very grateful and privileged to have Dave Cowen join us. He has got his hands in a lot of important work going on economically, involved on the board of directors at the airport here in Victoria. He's runs Butchart Gardens, a major tourist destination. He's very much involved in a lot of sort of economic thinking, regional integrative economic thinking in this part of the world, and I'm already way out of my league just trying to introduce him.
Thank you, Michael, and good morning, everybody. I feel very privileged to be here among an accomplished group, and I just want to congratulate and encourage all of you to start, because I think you're taking a very important course, a very important program. How people move around the world, how people are prevented from moving around the world is a very important topic of study. And this morning, I'm going to be giving you my common sense perspective and experience as a business person who operates a garden, but it's a garden where 1 million people from around the world come every year. And it's pretty much every country you can name. It's really quite amazing. So our business is very connected to how our border performs, and over the years have been involved through tourism and transportation and meetings with government to try and catalyze discussions like you're having here, where different perspectives are brought together and shared about the border. And if I go back 10 or 12 or 15 years, those discussions were quite difficult because of sovereignty, and countries had different perspectives. So to have business in the middle saying, hey, we see barriers, we see accessibility issues, we hear from the traveling public about the frustrations, challenges, and opportunities. We didn't always feel listened to, but it's very different today. A lot of us have worked very hard to become part of the dialogue. So, that's the perspective I'm going to be sharing. And I'm sure you'll correct me. I'm looking forward to learning something myself this morning. Every time I do one of these presentations, I come back with different perspective. And it's really important for me today to be here, because on Sunday, I'm going to Whistler, and we're having a large meeting with the Pacific Northwest Economic Region and the Regional Tourism Council. And I'm going to explain that to you in a couple of minutes about what the Regional Tourism Council is, what we're trying to do. It's brand new, but it covers all of Northwest North America. So it's a destination management council where all of the tourism ministers and legislators and industry leaders sit, and we talk about what enables tourism, and border performance is a very important topic. So as we all know, travel is very, very important culturally, for business development and the economy, for families. So well-designed, safe, frictionless border is very important. And those of us in travel and tourism really believe that citizens ought to be able to travel freely to the destinations they love. And with emerging technology and the progressive decarbonization of the travel sector, that's becoming more and more possible every day. But if you woke up and looked at your news feed, you saw this morning that the world has ground to a bit of a halt in the travel world. We are very digitally dependent, with how people move and across borders. So I would say today there's a lot of learning happening in terms of uptime and making sure that recovery, when literally hundreds of thousands of people are impacted, happens as seamlessly and stress-free as possible. Because we have to realize at any moment in the travel pipeline, there are people speaking different languages, different physical and mental cognitive abilities, everything from vision to mobility and language. So how we recover at borders is very important. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that come Sunday. So next year, maybe I'll have something interesting to talk about there. So again, my lens is really through tourism and leisure travel. And we know in tourism that all transportation modes cross travel borders, and different transportation modes have different requirements and are treated differently. They require different infrastructure, and each traveler category has its own unique set of challenges. So Up front, I'll tell you, I'm actually a biologist. I am not a border expert. But as I said, travel has been a very important part of our National Historic Site, which our gardens are 120 years young. And one of the reasons we are commercially successful today is that my predecessors understood how people move. We're on an island, a rock in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And we really had to learn what the travel channels are and how people end up at our front gate so that we could influence along the way and apply some grease to help build business. So it's really been through that business growth perspective, survival really, that I came to this file. So 91% of our visitors come from off island, a lot from around the world, very high percentage from out of country. And our countries of origin broadly mirror the inbound stats for Canada. So US, UK, EU, Australia, all of Mexico, all of Asia, Mexico, and India, and then it goes on from there. Southeast Asia is definitely emerging as well. And our business is influenced by all modes of leisure travel, but also business travel, conference travel, and of course, people traveling to see friends and family. And on top of this, we know that we're an expensive place to get to. So nobody has to come here. And so travel to Canada and Vancouver Island needs to be easy. We need to be competitive as a destination. And there is opportunity in front of us. So if I think of ticket interlining, where bundled air, ground, and ferry tickets with embedded digital travel documents associated with travelers' identity and security profile, I look at that as a huge opportunity and something that we're not using right now. If we could have a secure digital travel wallet where travel credentials are present, easily scannable, accessible by airlines and border officials, along with your tickets, be it air, ground, or ferry, that makes travel easy for people. And with the advent of AI, the possibility of troubleshooting when something goes wrong becomes much stronger and easier for the traveler, taking that stress away, which helps the people who are working on the border trying to solve the problem. So I really do think there is power in digital travel documents, embedded travel tickets, as long as they're safe and secure. And this is an area that we'll certainly be discussing in Pinware. We'll hear from the experts. And there are some border officials on the call involved in security and technology. So I'm sure they see the bleeding edge of this. But as a business person, when I look comparatively and competitively around the world, I look to Europe and I see in the Schengen controlled areas, getting to your hometown is a lot easier than getting to Victoria in a lot of ways. And it may involve planes and trains, but the journey will be on one ticket. And of course, in the Schengen area, crossing borders is easy. So to be competitive, we need to really do the same in North America. And seamless journeys are very, very important when you're trying to get to people to an island. So in terms of current situational analysis, while our visitation demographics have been very stable over the years, I'm sure you'll all appreciate that the pandemic disrupted world travel patterns in, frankly, good and bad ways. And we're seeing this in the gardens. So in 2024, and we saw it last year, our visitor mix has become less US based and frankly more international than ever, which is good for business because long haul travelers tend to stay a little bit longer and they spend more. So we know that these travelers have experience crossing borders, and we want our border to be the best experience possible. In fact, we want it to be a memorable experience. Yeah, this is a bit of a preamble before I get into some slides, just to give you an idea of where we are at and where my perspective comes from.
How do you track the demographics of the people visiting gardens?
That's a good question because they come to us amalgamated, usually by ground transportation. It's not like at an airport or a hotel, but we work with tour operators, And then we just through our guest books, people love to sign and say where they're from. So very simple way of tracking countries of origin. Yeah, email as well, website visitation, etc. So you may ask why we're seeing this shift. I'm sure some of it is still pent up travel demand. And we know on previous journeys, citizens in each of these source markets had their own border experiences, some good and some bad. And to some degree, that memory has influenced their desire to resume travel. And I'll just take us back to post 9/11, the US-Canadian border. After the SARS outbreak, travel between the US and Canada was quite slow to resume. We called it border hangover in tourism because border requirements changed so much during these periods of uncertainty. US and Canadian citizens were unsure about travel for many, many months after the border stabilized. And because the US and Canada had differing approaches to border management during the crisis, travelers were uncertain and confused. So relevant to today, in other parts of the world, travel during COVID was more certain and there were more clear rules. So people in the US begged away from traveling to Canada, and we think maybe they still have a bit of an aversion. So it's up to us now to educate and let people know how the border works today, and that it is really quite an seamless experience. When COVID hit in 2021 and 2022, border restrictions really varied between the US and Canada. Each country took their own approach. And the result of that, I can just tell you from the front line, was that the call volume at the Butchart Gardens went through the roof because the traveling public could not figure out where to go to get the information about the travel documentation requirements that they had to provide. So our staff had to become experts overnight. We had to hire staff, add staff, but really as part of the tourism industry, we were using, our information source was the same as the traveler. So we had people every day researching, trying to stay updated on the changes. And one of the learnings is that we really need a comprehensive source that both countries feed into that's easy for travelers to access. And this is a project now that's underway through the Regional Tourism Council. It's actually funded by the Port of Seattle. And we're starting to move as we get towards FIFA games that are happening in Vancouver. We're going to try and get a good comprehensive website up so that no matter where you're from or what your challenges are in terms of language or accessibility, you're going to be able to get the travel information that you need in timely fashion. So underpinning all of this in Canada, we're very mindful that 30% of our international visitors land at a US port first before coming to any Canadian province. So international visitors don't just land directly in Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal. They come up from the US. So we need to make sure that the border is just not prepared for US citizens, but for every citizen that might show up there. And given that our business is really rooted on Vancouver Island, we can't move. As I said, understanding how people move internationally and why they're coming to Canada is very, very important. So I'm going to hold there for one moment. I brought up the topic of FIFA, and I'm going to start going through my slides and just see if anybody has a question or a comment. I've given you just a very quick overview, some perspective.
There's no questions coming. We're all fine.
Okay, I'll keep moving through this. So I'm sure everybody understands that there are different travel motivators that lead to complexity at borders. So there are different classes of tourists and travelers, whether cultural, leisure, holiday, business, visiting friends and family. And they all come with different security profiles and based on country of origin or type of activity or the history of the person impacts what their border experience is. And then we have to be mindful that 400,000 people cross the US-Canadian border every day. So that is an operational challenge if there ever was one. And then over top of that, the regulatory regime is challenging because many Canadian laws differ from those in the United States, including restrictions on who may enter and what they can bring with them. So all of that needs to be sorted out at time of arrival, or I think the direction now is to pre-clear or sort as much out ahead of pre-arrival as possible. So rather than present for the first time with a passport and a visa and a story about your lost dog, hopefully you're in the system. Perhaps you've been profiled as a low-risk traveler and you just sail on through. That's the goal. The idea is to start to funnel people that need secondary, that need further processing out of the big lineup so that they don't hold up everybody behind. Seems simple to do, but when you've got 400,000 people a day and different regulatory regimes, that is a real challenge. So our reference today is the US-Canadian border. Obviously, each country has a different view on how they assert sovereignty. And when you think of the issues that countries manage their national borders through, they've got a certain perspective on immigration and temporary foreign workers, refugees, trade, security and border protection. There's a long list here: use of technology, travel documentation, how they do pre-clearance, or how they invest in the border. And I'm curious, with everybody's experience here, what other factors do governments have to consider when it comes to operating a border? There's a long list. When you think of human trafficking, that's a real issue for FIFA. Can you think of any other issues?
Specifically with Canada, maybe agriculture and.
Sure. What people bring with them when they travel, souvenirs.
Yeah, trying to smuggle any type of goods, drugs.
Yes. Yeah. Could be invasive species, as simple as if I went down to Washington State with a boat to go water skiing with my friends and I come back across the border. That's a control point issue. There's a lot to think about.
Diseases.
Any other thoughts? Maybe when you get to your project in the second half around accessibility, you can think of some other issues. When you start to think about accessibility barriers and that concept of educating travelers on border requirements, there's so many terms and different programs. You think of Nexus and ETA versus ESTA, the issue of fraudulent ETA websites, differing visa requirements, passports, enhanced driver's license. There's no wonder that there's confusion at the border, particularly if travelers don't speak English or French, or have some other challenges, or are traveling with a big group. You think of the tour operator trying to bring 30 people across the border. That's a challenge. So where does the mainstream traveler go to get this information before crossing the border, to ask questions, to confirm documentation? It's usually through perhaps the tour operator, who is most times right, but they do make mistakes, or it's a government website. And if you go to the Transport Canada website or CBSA, those are very dense websites that have a lot of information, and it's difficult sometimes to figure out where to go. So hopefully with AI, in future, travelers will be able to go to a simple form, type in their nationality, country of origin, what the destination is, travel dates, answer some questions, and then with the help of AI, get streamed to the right information easily. And that just cuts down on frustration and increases the likelihood of a successful trip. So as you consider the challenge of accessibility, remember that the future of cross-border travel is biometric and digital. There's no question. And that raises ethical questions, security questions, all kinds of questions, frankly. And it's about adoption. In Canada and the US at the height of the pandemic, when we had to switch to digital vaccine credentials, that was a huge growth curve that came with a lot of challenges. So I wouldn't take any digital improvement lightly. You have to do that with research. You have to trial that with the customer. You have to look at how robust and secure the technology is. It's not something that you can do overnight. It has to be done thoughtfully and with a lot of collaboration, industry insight, And I would advocate a lot of discussion with customers. And I'll give you an example. International visitors on Alaskan cruise. I'll just introduce it a little bit here, and further on in the presentation, we'll talk about it a little more. There is, I'm sure you're familiar or have heard about cabotage. Underneath cabotage between the US and Canada, there's the Jones Act, which essentially protects US jobs and says that if ships are going to go point to point in the US, they have to stop at a US port first. It's meant to make it difficult to operate foreign built ships in point to point in the US. So it means that ships have to stop in Canada on the way to Alaska. If they leave from Seattle, they have to make a Canadian port stop on the way to Alaska. Well, Alaska is beautiful. The world wants to go there. And unbeknownst to a lot of passengers, there is a Canadian stop on this US Alaska cruise, and they end up in Victoria, and they need a visa before they even get on the ship. And sometimes tour operators or independent travelers that make their own arrangements don't realize that. So they end up in Seattle without the right visa, and the cruise line cannot permit them to board. They lose their trip at that point after coming from India or the UK or wherever. Canada used to have a consulate in Seattle where they could go and within 24 hours get an emergency visa and recover. And then about a decade ago, we cut the consulate. Closest one now is LA, so it's now not possible.
And what's the reason for stopping in Canada?
It's a regulatory requirement of the Jones Act. So there's two parts of the reason. The cruise line, we're also a great stop from a commercial point of view. They want to add Victoria as a port of call, but they also have to do it to satisfy the Jones Act, where there's a huge penalty. Yeah. And then, another key learning is the sudden imposition of visa requirements for Mexican visitors, and that's happened twice in recent history. Countries make their decisions for certain reasons. We're kind of tied to the US, and their worldview impacts our thinking. But of course, in tourism, we don't like surprises. And to have a great source market, very loyal and faithful source market, all of a sudden have a travel requirement announced very quickly, and there are security reasons that drive that quick announcement, is very, very difficult for business. So there's a lot of learning from each of those case studies about the impact on travel, and that is memory for the consumer, and we want them to come back sometime in the future. So if they've had a tough time on the first visit, that doesn't help. Why is all of this important when we talk about the economic impact of tourism and borders? I'll just give you a quick dashboard. This is what we look at in PINWAR, Destination Greater Victoria. Helps pull this research together. So the Pacific Northwest Economic Region is essentially Northwest North America, all the states, provinces, and territories. So tourism is 600,000 jobs, $71.3 billion in spending, and a staggering 214 million visitors move around the region. You can see how the visitor origin breaks down in terms of Canadian, USA, and international. You see that international proportionally is small at 12%, but it's the most important segment. It is the riskiest long-haul travel, subject to all kinds of risk, political or Mother Nature. But they are people that stay in hotels, stay a long time, and spend. So it's a very important segment. So 25 million leisure trips into Canada by US visitors, $11 billion to the Canadian economy, and 7.5 million leisure trips by international visitors, worth approximately the same amount. So you can see how international, or why international is important. And then here's the impact. COVID hits, and you can see tourism compared to other big sectors in British Columbia. We're the red line. So our company was down 91%. because the Canadian border was closed. Canada gave us every visitor it could produce. That was 9%. So we're a bit of a rare duck, I would say, being so heavily dependent on international travel. It's a wonderful compliment, but it just shows how dependent businesses like ours are on a border that's resilient and that can handle disruption. And that is our learning coming out of the pandemic. Nobody saw that meteor coming to the degree that it hit. And we all wonder with technology and good epidemiology, how can we handle threats in the future? Because we don't have to look very far to see other threats. We had SARS. These pulmonary diseases are prevalent, and we need to be ready for them. We feel like we're a sector that gets painted as being a vector. Everybody stopped world travel, yet the virus went everywhere. And then we had the socioeconomic problem of people being isolated from loved ones because they couldn't cross the border. People were dying without their loved ones being able to visit. Culturally, in our region, Indigenous families, they live on both sides of the US-Canadian border. They couldn't travel. These are all things that we should think about. Yes, health and security have to be the top of the pyramid. But we have to handle risk pragmatically, and we have to take each disrupting event and tear it apart and learn from it. And I don't think we've done that enough yet. And that's part of the reason why the Regional Tourism Council was born, so that we can keep rubbing on these points. None of us should be afraid to talk about when well or didn't go so well during these disrupting events. And we need to be honest with each other to see how we can help each other. And when it comes to bilateral relations between countries, I think that's very important. And it impacts how quickly we resume business afterwards. We need to keep the communication up, because that red line costs people their mental health, their houses. I had a friend die, I think, simply because of the stress of running his business through that. So it's real. The border is a life and death thing. It really, really is. And that's something we should all remember as we carry on with our work. So I mentioned that long-haul travel routes are vulnerable to political, economic, and environmental disruption. So our best resiliency strategy is really to have a high-performing US and Canadian border. So we have short and medium-haul markets to rely on in times of global crisis. So during good times, international visitors should be able to easily flow across the border. And when long-haul markets are in jeopardy, the US and Canada should be able to easily become each other's primary source market for tourism. So the world may shrink, but if we've got epidemiological protocols that work within the region is more than British Columbia. If people are able to go between Washington State and British Columbia at a minimum, this helps keep the pulse of tourism alive. This helps keep relationships and all of those other important parts of our society, like business, alive. There's more than enough domestic population in Northwest North America to sustain many destinations. And just ensuring that critical business travel and cultural travel can happen during border slowdowns would be a huge resiliency measure for tourism and travel. So does that make sense to everybody? That's the goal as I see it, to do some scenario planning for the border, figure out what the 2 or 3 most likely scenarios are, and just start to plan coordinated responses where the US and Canada know what each other are going to do. There are no surprises. Through the pandemic, I don't think each country really knew what the other was going to do, because the officials were in a tough position and were having to make decisions on the fly. So they did that through their own national perspective, and that led to differences in how protocols rolled out. It's completely understandable, but it had a lot of tough impact. So that's why we move on and talk about these things. So if we look around the world from Vancouver Island, there are experts that say there are very good examples of efficient and safe borders that are worth studying. And the US and Canada need to do that. So especially Canada, as we really lag the US in border infrastructure and technology investment. And whereas the US and Canadian border is considered by many as being quite high functioning, at the other end of the spectrum, I'd just like to give you one little case study example that you can look at where I think there's some constructive learning going on. One ongoing case study to watch and learn from is what's going on post-Brexit between the EU and the UK with the implementation of the new European EES, or entry and exit system. And there's a related Eurotunnel pilot connected to that. So this is happening at the same time the EU is conducting 10 pilot projects to ensure cross-border rail connections, including Amsterdam to London. So industry is working to increase volume while entry and exit protocols are being changed on the fly. So one wonders how that's going to play out at an operational level when there's 50,000 people trying to cross the border at a pinch point. So the EES is a new border security system that will register data on the exit and entry of citizens coming from countries outside the European Union and European Economic Area. So while that system is being implemented, for example, France is betting on the expansion of its high-speed travel TGV rail network to compete with congested air travel. So in Europe, short-haul flights are being discouraged. High-speed, efficient electric rail as a decarbonization strategy, very important. That's what we should be doing in North America. They're unrolling that. Very good for the environment, but challenging for borders and travel. So there's a lot to watch and learn. We should all keep reading about it. We see operators such as Eurostar and Getlink. These are the companies that manage the Eurotunnel. They're very worried that the need for biometric checks will bring additional difficulties for companies. And they're saying they don't have the space for the machines required for facial recognition and fingerprint kiosks. So something as simple as footprint and available space can grind things to a halt. So go ahead.
Could another time be, I don't know, I've seen news recently, especially out of Spain, a lot of protests around over-tourism.
Yes.
So there's, at the same time that there's a need to kind of expand volume of tourists
Yes.
at a high level. Public attitudes are pretty negative towards tourists now, especially in like overcrowded areas in Europe. So
Yes.
I wonder how you manage that public
Yes.
attitude.
That was one of the primary drivers for the Regional Tourism Council, which is a destination management council, where we have pinch points in the Pacific Northwest, but we don't have over tourism yet. You look at destinations like Tofino at certain times of the year, and they have infrastructure crunches around water and things like that. So that's what we're working to avoid. We want dispersion and carrying capacity strategies so that the number of transient visitors that come into an area is manageable. And you have to think beyond today and just experience what happens if an emergency happens. You need to look at your carrying capacity within a destination. Victoria has 4 million visitors a year. We are a small city. The region's 450,000 people, 4 million come. So at any one time, like at our site, we have 10,000 people there. Central Saanich is 9,500 people. If something happens and our emergency services need to come into play, we need to be prepared to handle the visitors who are out of country because they're going to have consular needs. They're going to have travel issues. So the question you ask is very important. What we work on in tourism is social license. So we try and learn from Venice and show our local community that we understand that's a case study gone bad. And here are the smart ways that we're working to avoid that. And having good data from the border and good ability to communicate with travelers when things happen is a first step towards good destination management.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's a very good question. And just to give you an idea about the scale of these logistics, SchengenVisaInfo.com has reported that about 1.4 billion passengers from more than 60 countries under the EU visa-free regime would be required to apply for ETI, for electronic visas ahead of time, before planning to visit any Schengen zone country. So when you think of the technical challenge there, holy cow, that's on a scale that I'm not even sure Microsoft, is going to be able to handle seamlessly. So there are some great stories to watch out there and learn from, and try to apply to what we're doing between the U.S. and Canadian border. And on my slide there, I say there's two other case studies: the evolution of the tourism working group to the Pinware Regional Tourism Council. So for many years, a colleague and I have been running an ad hoc tourism working group that had all of the states and provinces involved. And we lived through the pandemic and saw the need for a more legislated, structured, governed table for all states and provinces to come to that's multidisciplinary. What we saw is that all of the officials who design and operate the border were meeting over here, industry was over here, public was over here, and we just saw silos. So with this Regional Tourism Council through the Pacific Northwest Economic Region, which is a bilateral trade association based in Seattle. This is where the US and Canadian ambassador come once a year to have trade talks. It's very high level. This is where all of the like CBSA and CBP come. We're now around a structured table to discuss what policy or communication tools we need. And the pressure we put on ourselves is FIFA in 2026. We are coming out of the pandemic. The world's eyes are going to be on us. We know that international visitation is important, so we want FIFA to go well. So we've set this table up to have the right officials around, so we can try and figure out the gaps and opportunities. And then the second bullet there says Future Border Coalition. So that is something that I've been a part of over the years, and that is very high level, where the border astronauts come. We meet in the embassy in Washington, and it's where the people, the scientists, really come together and try and figure out the border. And then there's a few industry people there. What we're trying to do with the Regional Tourism Council is formulate good input for the Future Border Coalition. So we've got a big industry-based advisory committee that feeds up to the Pinware Regional Tourism Council, and then we'll distill policy recommendations and send it off to the Future Border Coalition. Just our common sense perspective and learnings. Lots of FBC people come to our meetings too. So more than ever, we're seeing pollination between those technical silos and then the operational side, where the result of all that technology and policy comes to play. So it's a very exciting time. It's been a long road to get to this level where engagement is becoming more broad and I think more healthy. And the US and Canada have an amazing relationship. We hope that continues through the next election cycle. There are challenges there for sure, because the ambassador gets picked by the president. So we might face a change, and that slows things down. We may have different attitudes towards how the border runs. And really, where stability happens is everybody that's on this class today. It's the people who are working in the system at the bureaucratic level, the official level, who are the constants, who are the experts, and who need to speak up and own their expertise and do their level best to keep the border functioning, because it's billions and billions of dollars of trade and people's lives. So it's really important perspective to have as we move towards the US election. Now, I have Michael, I think, has shared the terms of reference for the Regional Tourism Council. I'm not going to go through that. You can read through it. It might be good for you to pause at the break and scan through it before you do your exercise. You'll see some of the things we're working on, because you're doing an exercise around accessibility. And there may be some points in there that get you thinking, and you can see actually what's being worked on in industry, and maybe you'll give me an idea for my meetings next week. You actually have some opportunity here, frankly, because my co-chair, who's Representative Cindy Ryu, she's a legislator from Washington State. She's a firecracker, and she's going to be the president of Pinware starting next week, and she's very influential. And she's the one that's helped me make this Regional Tourism Council come into being. So she is looking for some practical things that we can do in the next year before FIFA. So accessibility is something that we're all very concerned about. So everybody here may have an idea that we should work on. So I'll pause for another minute. Any questions? Is this helpful so far?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think, especially when you travel, you don't really consider all of the planning that you don't do. There's so much you don't see when you travel. So getting like kind of scenes to look about, okay, this is what goes into consideration when thinking about where it's from a management perspective. It's very interesting.
It's huge.
Yeah.
And
especially the FIFA stuff, because there's been a lot of complaints in like high density cities like Toronto about already the management of FIFA. People are like, it's going poorly.
yeah.
And so I wonder how we're gonna like overcome public backlash, because that's already starting.
Could you reiterate the comment? It's pretty quiet for the people online, I think. Sure.
I'm very like quiet, sorry.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's a good, okay, so the comment around FIFA, and I touched on social license earlier for tourism, and then we have these mega events like FIFA. Well, like it or not, FIFA is coming to North America. It wasn't really a decision that those of us in the Pinware region at a tourism level pushed for. It was announced, and here we are. So my perspective on behalf of my colleagues is it's going to happen. So we want it to happen as seamlessly as possible. We want it to be as positive as possible for residents and for visitors. And our concern around the border is that there are going to be groups of people from countries that don't normally travel by group into Canada, not our normal source markets. So we ask, are we ready? And when whatever team makes it through, we don't want an issue at the border. We want that team and the officials and the fans to have a good border experience. That's a real reputational moment of truth. Just from being a proud Canadian, from a host perspective, we want that to work. But from a business perspective, it's critical. It's also from a national security perspective, it has to go well. There's just so many levels to it. And our concern when we were the little old tourism working group was that we saw these silos of planning. And I went to a meeting in Washington, DC at the embassy, and then we went down the way to Deloitte National Headquarters, which was this building that it's just like something you've never seen. They were the people hired to sort of run the FIFA games. And I've never seen a level of organization like this. But they were so focused on using the model that FIFA runs in every, where they kind of take over the destination, and they have their footprint their framework that they use. And I just went, wow, yeah, I'm not sure that's gonna go. We need to, as the host destination, start working with them soon. And
is it happening in Victoria?
Vancouver, Seattle, there's a number of cities around North America, Mexico. It's the first time it's ever been done between three countries.
Yeah.
But there's a half a dozen games in Vancouver, so it's BC Place, it's a massive amount of people. So real case study in the pros and cons of these mega events.
Is there infrastructure being built for FIFA specifically?
BC Place, which is a very large stadium, is being a huge investment. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. other cities are doing different things, but yeah, it's a real opportunity. So,
We have a hand when you're ready to.
oh yes, Maria?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I was also wanting to ask about the World Cup, especially like my question was more about like local responses to national policy, like the imposition of visas for Mexican nationals, which happened
Right.
basically like overnight. So
Yes.
I'm curious to hear your perspective on how this affects like Victoria tourism and just in general, like the trips that were already planned and local businesses.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Mexican mobility is like maybe not super huge, but it is big or considerable. So I'm curious about your perspective
Yeah,
about.
it's a very, very good question. Mexico has been a very good source market for Canada for a long time. Mexican visitors are shoppers. They love to experience, authentic things. So they disperse. They want to, travel around the region. And it has been very hard when visa requirements have come in suddenly by government decision and disrupt travel. And the segment just disappears off the charts. People stop traveling, and there's security reasons. There's reasons that government does it that way. Certainly in travel and tourism, we're not happy about that. And what we hope is that with communication and some diplomatic work, it recovers over time. One of the concepts that we're trying to promote to combat this type of thing is the expansion of trusted traveler programs. So, for example, Nexus in Canada is Canada US. That's a trusted traveler program where if you pre-enroll, it helps you go across the US-Canadian border. But for tourism, it would be great if it was the US, Canada, and Mexico. Why can't we have a North American free tourism region where it's easier for Mexican residents, US residents, Canadian residents to visit each other's country? We're neighbors. And if we have a process that people can go through, and if they're willing to submit themselves to the scrutiny and get pre-approved so that they can make a discretionary decision to say, oh, there's a soccer game I want to go see in Vancouver in a month. Let's go. It doesn't become a huge bureaucratic issue where you have to research what travel documentation you need. So trusted traveler programs, it's a concept we weren't even talking about 10 years ago, and now we're talking about it. So I would say there's hope there, but there's a lot of political discussion to stitch three countries together. And it's the closest we're going to come to a Schengen region, right? Is to take a trusted traveler approach. And I hope in my career we get there, or at least get some AI assisted application process. So around the electronic travel or authorizations and the visa issuance, it's easier and better. The other route we've been proselytizing on is synchronized visa applications. So for international visitors who come, why can't they get a US and a Canadian and maybe even a Mexican, whatever travel requirements they need for North America, one path, one set of documents sufficient, so that it's not asynchronous. They don't have to travel. When Canada had approved destination status from China, many of our Chinese source markets were thousands of miles from where they had to go to get their travel documentation. So, synchronizing and harmonizing those processes, I would hope would lead to things like the sudden imposition of visas for Mexican travelers to be rare. Or more rare, or at least have a more elegant application. Because it's hard. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I do think like and I would be curious to know how these discussions play out between the priorities of tourism and like business versus the national priorities of like security. And I know like the visa was kind of established because of increases in asylum applications.
Yeah.
But my sense is like the requirement of having a US visa and then you can still have an ETA and not apply for a visa is maybe a right step in that kind of direction that
Yes.
you're mentioning. But I'm curious about like what happens in those meetings in terms of like governance and how as like tourism boards and like with these vested economic interests, how do the discussions play out versus like the national security issues? Like
Yeah.
I don't know, from your perspective, I would be curious to hear how do you
Yeah.
propose a trusted traveler program rather than
Yeah. The we could spend a whole day talking about this. My perspective on that was, again, the national security discussions have a certain amount of privacy around them. They happen over there in one silo, and then there's the industry over here. But what we're seeing now is border officials at a high level are becoming more forthcoming so that industry understands what the requirements are. And what we're asking is for innovation. We're saying, great, just let us know what the issues are. And there are customers, and we invest in technology too. Why don't we work together and foster innovation? That's another reason the Regional Tourism Council there, that one table that's multidisciplinary, comes together with officials and industry so that we can talk about what innovative programs we can try. So the concept of doing border pilots is very important. The Pacific Northwest is a very smart region. We have, Microsoft and Amazon and all of these major companies, technology-based, and we ought to be a hotbed and running incubating projects where we can be innovative and try things. Set the scope so the risk isn't high, because we'll learn. And again, 10, 15 years ago, government, this is our area that we control. You just do what you're told, industry. Now we're seeing a little bit more collaboration, willingness, because they're starting to see the huge impact of tourism. Tourism wasn't well understood going back over time, where this happy, fun industry that everybody thinks just happens, but really there's a lot of hardcore sales. We're Canada's largest export sector. We're in BC, we're bigger than mining, fishing, forestry combined. The value of tourism is more GDP than those three sectors combined. And those are sunsetting industries. If we do the destination management part, if we don't allow over tourism and we run tourism sustainably, we'll go for 10,000 years. And you know what? We bring countries together. We foster friendships between nations, which makes us less likely to go to war. We're the tip of trade, because people that come to our destination, they often want to settle and bring part of their business here. There's so much good around well-run tourism that builds depth into the economy. And the best part is we employ people. It's very difficult to outsource tourism, and it's kind of difficult to do it by AI. I can't run a garden by AI. And you might make a hotel really efficient, but at the end of the day, you still need people to operate the hotel or provide the experience. And travelers crave meeting people. That's what travel and tourism is about.
Yeah, that's stunning to me. I didn't realize that tourism as sort of as an industry is larger than all of those natural resource and energy production.
Yes.
Fascinating. And also there's I think a really appropriate comment from Madison here. Madison writes, I appreciate that the Pacific Northwest Economic Region is a collaborative effort that is regional and organizes despite borders to address challenges within the tourism industry. It reminds me somewhat of the Cascadia movement, which suggests that political, social, economic conditions are more sustainable when they're organized around naturally occurring areas.
Yes, brilliant comment. And Pima really has its roots in the Cascadia mentality. And that's what we're trying to do, is that the border is kind of artificial. We're trying to erase the border. It needs to be there, but from a travel perspective, it ought to be really strong and protective, but porous, as porous as it can be. I think in tourism, we look at the importation of goods, how widgets move across the border, and we're very jealous. We're trying to apply cargo philosophy and cargo, a lot of the transportation and cargo methodology to how people move and how, they can track a container with high precision anywhere in the planet. So there's a lot to be learned in tourism from how inanimate cargo moves. I know that sounds kind of cool, but it's true, because when you think about it, it just becomes complex for government to administrate a border when you've got one set of principles to move a widget across the border and another set of principles there ought to be some interoperability there.
This is a topic in border studies and migration studies where the question is being asked after these decades of globalization, why does it seem like it's globalization for every type of thing except people?
Yes, that is exactly it.
It's like the brakes are still on the movement of people across borders, but everything from data to more natural things like culture and trade and finance and those things. It's no borders, no borders, no borders is the movement, but people are stuck in sort of the 20th century or something.
Yes, I can give you my view on that quickly, because it's a very important question. And again, we're having this meeting at a very important time because for the first time ever, Canada's industry minister is coming to the meeting next week. So in Canada, tourism as an industry has been greatly misunderstood because essentially Revenue Canada, the tax people, the accountants, do not recognize tourism as a valid export sector. So we're a service export sector, but we don't export durable goods. We don't send cans of paint to other countries. We bring people in, we bring foreign currency in, but we don't sell skidoos or nuclear reactors. We're this soft experience. So we get treated from a tax perspective very differently. So a lot of sectors that sell durable goods into other countries get all kinds of tax support, and the way those goods move across borders is very different than the people side. So we've been arguing for 15 years that tourism people movement needs to be viewed kind of through the same lens. Obviously, it's going to be different in the application, but the philosophy is, if you're talking trade, trade is trade. Whether it's an experience, the tax definition is, well, your experience is happening on Canadian soil. That experience is not being exported to another country. And that's really where the rub is. It is as simple as that. And I've been to Ottawa and had that discussion with the tax people, and there's no moving them. It's going to take political will. But again, here comes the industry minister. This is exactly what I'm going to be saying to her. Hopefully we get more than 3 minutes together. And hopefully over time we win that argument, because you've seen how big and important the industry is. And for employment, when so many jobs are sunsetting out of primary industries, if we don't enable tourism, then my children may not have a job. And that's really important to me, because I want them to go back. Not too far away, but anyway, excellent question. I don't know if this makes sense to you all, but it's very, very important. But it's just how our country views things right now. But things can evolve, and we have to stay hopeful. Any other comments or questions with respect to border policy and technology? The concept of a synchronized visa pilot is something that we're hoping for FIFA might come true. So this, when visitors from China, when Canada had approved destination status, China very quickly with approved destination status went from about number 15 or 16 on our list of, ranked list of source markets to number 1 in about 2 years. And it was a very high spending demographic.
Sorry, just going back,
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think about it. So you're proposing that tourism is considered as a form of trade?
Yes.
Okay.
Like as a valid export industry. And when your sector is a valid export industry, you get placed into what they call the trade accounts. which means how they measure it is very different. It makes your sector eligible for different levels of regulatory support, tax support, tariff relief.
Okay.
Like, for example, tourism operators that bring a group into the country, they would get the goods and services tax back. We wouldn't
Oh.
tax them. That would be an incentive, just like we incentivize softwood lumber sales.
Mhm, mhm.
2x4 and the person need to be treated the same way from that tax perspective.
Right now, it's just being considered its own separate entity.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
as a part of the services.
that's right. And we get no benefit.
No
that
benefits?
No.
Okay.
It's heavily regulated, heavily taxed. Not treated with the same level of support or importance by government.
So when something like FIFA happens,
Mhm.
how does that, is that still considered a service?
Well, that's, I think FIFA
Feels
has.
very much like a trade that, because there's 3 countries involved.
Yeah, and
There's people.
I think FIFA has caught the national government's attention because of the tension that you alluded to. I think they're feeling the pressure that they're gonna have to show a win here.
Yeah.
That hosting this kind of mega event, for all the headache, frankly, that it's gonna cause Vancouverites, has a tangible payback. So I think industry ministers coming in think, okay, maybe we do need to think a little bit differently and look at this event as a product, as an export opportunity, because it truly is.
Yeah, especially considering 3 countries are involved and it's very,
Well,
yeah, I thought tourism was a trade, like a subset of trade. Now that it's a service, it's interesting.
it's a very soft subset of trade, and
Yeah.
it needs to become,
More definitive.
more definitive, and treated the same as a durable goods
Mhm.
export
Yeah.
sector.
Thank you for.
Yeah, you bet. I was talking about synchronized visa pilots. So again, where source countries have citizens coming to North America, making it easy for them to get US, Canadian, and hopefully Mexican visas. I touched on interlining, where for carrying capacity and dispersion, so we don't have over tourism, we want people to come into a destination like Victoria and then move around. So we want it, if they go to Seattle after or before Victoria, I'm fine. They go to Vancouver, go up to Tofino, at their, as they go through the purchasing funnel and they're booking their vacation either through their travel agent or online, Expedia, whatever it is. I hope on the right-hand side of the screen, all of the travel requirement AI is helping them figure out what they need. And then I'm hoping that it's stitching together an interline ticket that does air and ferry and ground. And that digital wallet plays out in time and helps the people move from point A to point B.
I would imagine that FIFA wants this. If this is the first time there's like 3 different countries hosted as the base of the World Cup, you would think that they would want everyone who's going to have the opportunity to hop from city to city to tourism the games.
I think that's why they hired Deloitte in the big building.
And what is Deloitte?
Just a huge, massive consulting company. And in Washington, DC, it's beyond belief. If you ever get a chance to go to this building and go inside, it's just big brain trust, and they run procurement for the US military. So I was going up to the little happy tourism meeting in one little cubicle on the 17th floor, but we actually made a mistake and pushed the wrong elevator button and got off on the Marines section, and we walked into this, and it was all done up like a battleship, and it was just beyond belief. It's very big intelligence, and anyway, they're the ones that are trying to stitch all this together and get governments together to kind of do that, but very short timeline to pull it together. And anyway, they'll be at the meeting next week, so we'll see what they have to say. It is in FIFA's best interest to do that for sure, but the infrastructure is not there from a technical point of view or a political point of view at this point. We've really worked on increasing the coordination and quality of communication about border requirements for the traveling public. So this pilot project that the Port of Seattle is sponsoring. Keep Googling as we get towards FIFA. I hope you'll find a website that shows all the travel requirements in one place for the US and Canada. And I hope it's helpful. We're going to die trying on that one. It's the one output that we want to see, mainly because it's a pilot. We're going to learn from it. It may not be totally successful, but that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that we try. The other part of tourism that's very important with the labor shortage that we've been suffering is worker mobility for hospitality. So there's worker mobility. There are programs for engineers and other professional sectors, but we would like to see some liberalization for hospitality workers because there is seasonality to what we do. So people, for example, could work at the Butchart Gardens over the summer and then go down to a ski resort in the US in the winter and end up with 12 months of employment. We would love to do a reciprocal work agreement. We could put 12 months of work together and employ more people that way. Very simple to conceptualize, very difficult to execute, but potentially very, very important in terms of keeping tourism moving forward. And I think it's a lovely way to run your business because you get people with different perspectives from different countries and different experiences. And it's just, you end up with a better staff. So we've really pushed for higher enrollment in Nexus, the North American Trusted Traveler Program. We would like that program to include Mexico, US, and Canada. We know it's not going to reach the Schengen level, but some steps towards making the application easier would be very important. Right now, living in Victoria, to get my Nexus card, I have to go for an interview in Vancouver. There's no mobile interview opportunity. You have to go to the airport in Vancouver. It made it a little bit easier if you're traveling to the US. You can pull aside, add an hour to your journey and go do it while you're on your way to somewhere. So it's a little bit better. Good idea, but really, ultimately, we need to make it easier to get that Nexus card. So we're coming up on 20 minutes after.
Yes, we have a hand up.
Yes, absolutely.
Maria.
Sorry, me again. I wanted to ask about the worker mobility that you mentioned in the hospitality sector, because I know that NAFTA visas exist, but it's for only some professions, which I don't think include hospitality.
Right.
And NAFTA is going to be reviewed in 2026. So I was wondering if there's a sense that these profession days might be renegotiated from the discussions you have been having, or is it really not even in the conversation?
Honestly, I think it depends what happens in the US election.
Yeah.
It depends what happens in the US election. That is a file that we're going to try and get some momentum on at this upcoming meeting. I'll certainly be mentioning worker mobility, and hopefully at the bureaucratic level, we can do something to lay the foundation, and maybe do a pilot for FIFA. So I'm hopeful.
Well,
Yeah.
hopefully I can follow some of these conversations because I'm really interested in that, like NAFTA negotiations and
Yeah, and I mean, NAFTA just was kind of tuned up. So I don't know what appetite there is around more progress there. I know there is focus on the Columbia River Treaty. It's not tourism, but as an example of the two countries still working on issues, there still is an appetite there. So again, I'm hopeful.